I was thinking about peaches, the soft ones, the kind that bruise if you hold them with anything less than tenderness. I had 4 of them tucked carefully into my paper bag as I walked home from the market, the afternoon sun warm on my shoulders. And for once, I wasn't thinking about loss or time or memory. Just peaches. I remember that clearly, because life always feels clearest right before it changes. The iron gate to my apartment courtyard was half open, swaying just slightly in the breeze. It had a distinct sound, a low hinge cry that I'd learned to recognize from anywhere in the building. I reached out to push it open, but a hand touched the gate first. Not aggressive, not rough, just present. I looked up. Celeste Ward stood in front of me. Pressed blouse, hair pulled back neatly, a face that held stories she never wasted breath telling. We were neighbors for 6 years, but she was not the type to linger in conversation. Polite nods, shared glances, 2 women who understood that silence between women of our age is not awkwardness, but respect. So when she blocked the gate, it was not coincidence. She was choosing to interfere. And Celeste did nothing without reason. She didn't blink as she looked at me. Her voice was steady, low, carefully controlled. "Mrs. Harland, do you know who comes to your apartment every Monday?" The question was not sharp. It didn't need to be. It simply entered me, like cool air under a closed door. I didn't speak. She waited. No explanation, no elaboration. Just a truth offered like a key I had to decide whether to turn. She stepped back. "I thought you should know." And then she walked past me and disappeared down the sidewalk, her footsteps soft and certain. The peaches shifted in the bag. Their scent rose, sweet and mild, but now there was a weight beneath it, like something faint and metallic. I pushed the gate open and walked inside slowly. My building was old, not in the neglected way, but in the lived way. The stair railing was smooth where hands had traveled hundreds of times. The sunlight always cut through the hallway window at the same angle each afternoon, leaving a rectangle of warmth on the worn carpet. I used to sit in that square of light in the early days after Graham passed, not to cry, just to remember what warmth felt like. But today, as I climbed the stairs, the light felt colder, or maybe my awareness had changed. Sometimes the world shifts without moving. When I entered my apartment, everything looked ordinary. The coat on the hook, the small ceramic bowl for keys, the framed photograph of Graham and me on our 38th anniversary, his smile quiet, mine shy. Everything was still, but stillness is not the same as unchanged. I set the peaches on the counter. One had bruised after all. I pressed my thumb lightly against the darkened skin. It yielded too easily. Frail fruit, frail truths, frail certainties. I don't remember sitting down at the kitchen table. I only remember the way the chair felt cool beneath my hands. Celeste's words repeated, without needing to be spoken. Every Monday. A schedule, a routine, a pattern. Someone was comfortable, familiar, practiced. Not a stranger. Strangers do not choose Mondays. Strangers do not enter quietly enough to go unnoticed for this long. Strangers do not know when I leave the house. So I asked myself the only question that mattered. Who has access to my life? The answer was short and painful. People think grief leaves you with memories, but really, grief leaves you with keys. Keys to things no one else understands. Keys only one other person would know how to use. I breathed in, slow, measured. The faint scent of lilies lingered in the air. Not my lilies. I haven't bought flowers since the funeral. The air tasted like silence. Not comfortable silence. Silence that waits. Silence that watches. Silence that knows more than I do. I did not panic. Panic is loud, and I have learned that quiet is stronger. I opened the windows, let the breeze move through the living room. The curtains shifted softly, a whisper of movement, like someone stepping out of a room just before you enter. The sound of absence. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. My footsteps felt louder than usual, or the house was listening harder. 3 steps before reaching the door, I stopped. Not because I was afraid, but because the air changed. Just slightly. Someone had been here. Recently. Recently enough that the room still remembered. The scent was floral, soft, young, not mine, not the scent of age or familiar lotion or wash linen. This was the scent of someone who did not belong to my timeline, not my years, not my memories, not my grief. Someone younger, someone living in a world where the future still stretches forward instead of looping back into what has already been lost. Someone who shouldn't know this house at all. I stepped into the bedroom. The covers were smooth. The pillow where Graham once slept was undisturbed. Everything was in place, but intact is not the same as untouched. I sat on the edge of the bed and folded my hands in my lap. The house was quiet, but quiet is not always peace. Sometimes quiet is a question, and the answer was already forming in the space behind my ribs. I was not alone in this house. Not just now, but in all the Mondays I had not noticed passing. A slow intrusion, so soft it could have been mistaken for memory. The peaches were still on the counter in the kitchen. The bruised one had started to leak a tiny drop of juice. It slid slowly down the curve of the fruit, shining, delicate, precise, almost beautiful. I wiped it away with my thumb and whispered to no one. I see it now. Not the intruder, not the act, but the meaning. Someone had stepped into my life not to steal, not to break, but to be near something they missed. And that something was not me. It was Graham. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Grief had already taught me how to break quietly. But this was not a break. This was the beginning of remembering. And remembering always leads somewhere. The hallway outside my apartment has always had a particular smell, a mix of old carpet fibers, dust warmed by the afternoon sun, and the faint citrus cleaner the janitor uses on Tuesdays. A familiar scent, a lived-in scent. The days that look like the ones before them. But lately another smell had started to appear there. Something faint, soft, sweet. Not heavy enough to be perfume, but present enough to leave a trace in the air, like someone passed through and the scent chose not to follow them. I noticed it again the morning after Celeste spoke to me at the gate. The hallway was empty, as always, yet it didn't feel empty. There are silences that comfort and silences that observe. This was the second kind. I walked down the hallway slowly, letting my fingertips drift across the wallpaper. The floral print had faded in places where the sun touched it, leaving pale shapes where color once lived. As I reached the middle of the hallway, I stopped. The scent was strongest there. Sweet, floral, soft like a glove laid gently across the cheek. Not familiar, not mine. I closed my eyes and breathed in once more, deeply this time, and something inside me stirred. Not recognition, but memory. Memory of being younger. Memory of innocence. memory of a life where I was seen in ways I no longer was. It hurt the way nostalgia hurts, gently, like water wearing down stone. The hallway light flickered once and then steadied. Footsteps echoed up the stairs. Not fast, not heavy, measured. Celeste appeared at the end of the hallway. She did not seem surprised to see me there. She paused, hands folded lightly in front of her. "It's stronger today, isn't it?" I nodded. She stepped closer. Her steps were quiet, as though she'd learned to walk without disturbing anything around her. "It's a young woman's perfume," she said softly. "Warm florals. A little honey, a little jasmine." I looked at her. "How do you know?" She gave a small shrug. "I used to wear it, a long time ago." Her eyes didn't look at me. They looked at the far end of the hallway, where the light was softer. There was a pause. Not awkward, weighted. "People leave traces of themselves without realizing," Celeste said. I waited. She continued. "And people who miss someone leave bigger traces than anyone else." Her gaze shifted to mine. The words felt pointed, accurate, painful. "You think it's someone who misses him?" I said quietly. Celeste didn't answer aloud. She didn't need to. Her silence was confirmation. The hallway light flickered again, but this time it didn't return to steady. The bulb hummed, flickered, dimmed, then brightened sharply, a pulse of mechanical breath. We stood in the light together, two women, two pasts, two things unsaid. Finally, Celeste whispered, "Grief draws company. Sometimes the wrong kind." I felt that sentence in the back of my throat. Not choking, just settling. I thought of the mug in my kitchen, the one washed but not dried. I thought of the bedroom air, warm with someone else's presence. Of the photograph moved, slightly but not carelessly. These were not violations. They were visits. Someone was coming here for him, not me. Celeste touched my arm, barely, a feather touch, the kind that says you are not alone without needing the words. She said, "When you are ready to see it fully, you will." Then she walked past me, down the stairs, out of the hallway, leaving behind only the scent and the quiet. I stood in that hallway longer than I realized, long enough for the sunlight to shift, long enough for the perfume to fade, long enough for memory to open a door I had kept locked. Finally, I walked back inside. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was small, but it echoed. Inside, I went to the bedroom again. Not because I expected anything new, but because I needed to see what I had seen the day before again, with new eyes. I stood in the doorway first. The room felt warmer this time. I stepped closer. The pillow where Graham once slept was still neatly in place, untouched, unmoved, undisturbed. But grief teaches you to see things in layers. The presence was not in the pillow. It was in the air above it. I sat down on the edge of the bed again. This time I did not fold my hands. I let them rest open, palms up, like I was waiting to be given something. Instead, a memory came. A memory of the last spring we had together, Graham sitting in his chair by the window, the sunlight falling on his face, his breathing already shallow, his voice softer than ever. He had said, "If I go before you, remember me in the quiet." I had nodded, tears pressing behind my eyes. "Not in the noise," he had added. "Grief is loud enough. Remember me in the spaces where nothing is happening. Silence. I had not understood the meaning then. Now I did. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. And someone else had been living inside that presence, not to break it, but to share it. It could have been unsettling, but it wasn't. Not yet. The fear would come later. This moment was something else entirely. Awareness. I rose from the bed and crossed the room slowly. My hand hovered in front of the photograph on the mantel. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The memory was enough. Someone had stood here. Someone had looked at my husband. Someone had remembered him too. And that is when I realized something important. This was not about intrusion. It was about longing. And longing does not shout. It whispers, just like grief, just like silence. I walked back into the hallway and closed the bedroom door behind me. Not to shut anything out, but to acknowledge the boundary. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This quiet had shape now, direction, intention. I knew where the next question would lead me. Not to fear, but to watching. And watching is where truth always begins. The kitchen is where grief lives longest. Not in the bedroom, where absence is expected. Not in the living room, where memory can be tucked away behind photographs. The kitchen remembers habits. Teacups, spoons, the sound of the kettle, the placement of jars, sugar measured by hand, memory instead of thought. So when something changes there, it is not small. It is personal. I woke early the next morning, not startled awake, simply awake. The kind of waking that comes when your mind is already standing before your body catches up. I walked to the kitchen barefoot, the tile cool beneath my feet, and I saw it again. The mug. The same mug from before. White ceramic, small hairline crack along the handle. A mug I rarely use because of that crack. It sat on the counter, upside down, like it had been washed and placed there. But water pooled around it again. Not much, just a half ring of moisture, like a touch of breath made visible. Someone had used it recently. Not yesterday, not last week. Today. Now. I ran my finger along the water ring. It smudged. Fresh. My heart did not race. A curious thing happens when you are older. Fear becomes slower. It has to move through memory first. I stood still and listened. The house was quiet. Again. Not empty. Just quiet. I walked to the sink. The sponge was damp. I touched the faucet. It was cold. Whoever had been here was gone, but not long gone. The scent in the hallway led me here. The mug confirmed it. Someone was comfortable in my home. Comfortable enough to wash dishes. Comfortable enough to leave a trace, but not erase it. Comfortable with me not knowing. I dried the mug with a cloth and placed it back into the cabinet. Not where it had been set. Where it belonged. Then I opened the cupboard above the stove. This was where I kept things that mattered. Graham's pocket watch, the silver tea strainer we bought in Charleston, the letters. I reached into the box of letters. My fingers moved through familiar paper, but even without counting, I knew. One was missing. Still missing. The absence was louder today. Absence is a sound, when you know what used to be there. I closed the box gently, not to hide what was missing, but to mark the loss. I sat at the kitchen table. The morning light spilled across the surface like honey. Warm, soft, patient. This time, I did not avoid the thought. I did not push it away. I let it form. Jonas. The name took its time coming to me, not because I forgot him, but because I had intentionally placed him somewhere I did not have to revisit. He had been kind to Graham, kind to us both. He had sat in the hospital chair during the long nights when breath was hard for him. He had stayed after others left. He had helped me with medical paperwork I could not bring myself to read. He had been a presence of steadiness. But there is a difference between helping a woman through grief and entering her life without asking. Still, the mug told me something important. He came here gently. No rummaging, no broken locks, no displaced objects. Just the smallest ripple. A mug, a scent, a photograph shifted just slightly. He was not here to take. He was here to be near something, to be near someone, to be near Graham, in the place Graham had loved. Grief does not expire. It changes shape. Sometimes it becomes longing. Sometimes it becomes trespass. Sometimes it becomes a Monday morning routine. I rested my hand on the table. My fingertips felt the grain in the wood, alive, present. I was not angry, not yet, but I was no longer unaware. And once awareness enters, it does not leave. I stood and began cleaning the kitchen, not because it needed cleaning, because I needed to move. Movement helps thoughts organize themselves. I washed the kettle, wiped the counter, swept the floor. Small motions, grounding. The mug stayed in the cupboard, a quiet artifact of what I now knew. When I finished, I sat again. The house felt different now, not because someone had been here, but because I had finally acknowledged it. There is a moment just before truth reveals itself where everything feels suspended. This was that moment. I looked toward the hallway, toward the bedroom, toward the space where memory breathed. And I whispered, not out of fear, but understanding. I am not the only one who misses him. The silence that followed was gentle, not empty.
Shared. Grief has a way of collecting in corners. Not the corners you see every day, the ones you sweep and dust and tidy. The other ones, the corners of memory, the corners of time, the corners where silence pools and becomes something heavier. That morning, after noticing the mug again, I found myself walking room to room, not searching for anything in particular, just taking inventory. The apartment was not grand. 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway, windows that faced the street and caught late morning light like it was something borrowed and temporary. I had lived in enough places to know that a home is not made of walls. It is made of continuity, the repetition of things, where you place your keys, how you fold a blanket, which way you turn the faucet out of habit. So when continuity shifts, even by a fraction, the heart notices before the mind does. I began to notice more small changes than before. The lamp in the living room angled slightly differently. The book on the coffee table, not exactly where I remembered leaving it. A curtain drawn just enough for a sliver of light to cut into the room. Small things, soft things, nothing violent, nothing disturbed, just touched, like someone was living inside my memories of him, not erasing, just observing them. I paused near the window and let my hand rest on the back of the chair Graham used to fall asleep in on quiet Sunday afternoons. It still held the faintest dip in the cushion where his body had pressed into it over time. Time leaves impressions on fabric the same way it leaves impressions on people, some deeper than others. My fingertips lingered on the fabric, not to hold on, just to say hello. That was when the memory surfaced, slow, like something rising through warm water. The day he brought that chair home, he'd found it at an estate sale across town. Worn, faded, one leg slightly uneven. I had asked him, why that one? And he had smiled in that quiet way he did, the smile that didn't widen his mouth, but softened his eyes. Because it already feels like us. A little used, a little tired, but still warm and still holding. I hadn't understood the weight of those words back then. Or maybe I had, and simply didn't know I would spend years returning to them. Now, standing in the morning light, I felt the memory settle into my chest. Not heavy, just present. I moved to the shelf where we kept our photographs. Family gatherings, birthdays, dinners at the kitchen table where laughter had come easily. The kind of laughter that bubbles up before anyone knows what's so funny. There was one picture that always drew my eye. Not the posed ones, the candid one, taken by accident, or maybe on purpose. Graham sitting on the edge of the dock at the lake near our old house. Shoes off, pants rolled to the knees, feet in the water. The camera had caught him mid-laugh, not smiling, laughing. The kind of laughter that crinkles the corners of the eyes, the kind that tells the truth about a person. I traced his silhouette with my gaze. I didn't reach out to touch the frame this time. Memory is fragile when touched too hard. But as I looked, something shifted. The photograph was still in its place, but the small seashell we had found on that trip, the one that used to rest beside the frame, was turned slightly. Not moved away, just turned. Not by accident. When someone remembers alongside you, they don't disturb the memory. They interact with it. And the realization hit quietly. The person who came here did not come to violate my home. They came to stand in the pieces of life I had built with him.
They came to remember him too. My breath didn't break, but it did deepen. I closed my eyes and let the thought unfold fully. Someone else missed him. Not the way I did, not with the intimacy of decades, but with a grief that had its own shape. Grief is personal, but missing someone is universal. I opened my eyes. The room was the same, but I was not. I sat down at the dining table again, the same place the mug had rested. The sunlight had shifted, stretching longer now, reaching across the table like a hand reaching home. The apartment was quiet, but not empty. It felt shared, not intruded upon, not taken from, shared. And that awareness was both peaceful and unsettling. Not a threat, a presence that had chosen my silence as refuge. I pressed my hands together gently and leaned forward. The realization settled with a soft thud inside my chest. I was not the only person grieving him. There was someone else who had been grieving in parallel, just out of view. Someone who did not know how to ask for remembrance. Someone who entered through silence because silence felt safer than words. Someone who came on Mondays, every week, every time I didn't see. I wondered why Mondays, what Monday meant, why that was the day memory walked my hallway. Maybe I already knew. Maybe I had always known. The clock on the wall clicked once, not loud, just enough to draw me back into the present. I rose from the table, opened the window, let the breeze enter. Fresh air filled the kitchen, clean and cool, pushing the scent of yesterday out of the room. I watched the curtains flutter. I didn't speak, but the silence around me felt like it was listening. Listening the way someone does when they care enough not to interrupt. And quietly, without force, a thought formed. I am ready to see. Not confront, not accuse, not demand. Just see. Grief had been a closed door. Now it was opening. Not quickly, not dramatically, softly, the way morning opens. I walked to the front door and placed my hand on the lock. Not to close it tighter, to understand it better. Locks are not simply barriers. They are boundaries. And boundaries are not made of metal. They are made of choice. I did not change the lock. I did not add a chain. I did not move furniture in front of the door. I simply stood there and breathed. If someone was going to enter my home again, I would not hide from the moment. I would meet it. Not with fear, with awareness. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply be present in their own life again. I was looking for understanding. The next Monday would come, and when it did, I would be ready, not to stop anything, but to witness. Grief had been living beside me in silence. It was time for silence to speak. Monday came quietly, the way most important days do. There was no anticipation in the air, no dramatic feeling, just morning light, the sound of a distant truck outside, and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I moved through the house with intention that day. I didn't rush. I didn't fidget. I simply moved, the way one does when preparing for something unspoken. I made tea. I opened the blinds. I straightened the throw blanket on the couch. Small gestures to ground myself in a space that was mine. At 8:17 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table, the same chair, the same position, the same angle to the window. I wanted the house to look exactly as it always did. Nothing rearranged, nothing confrontational. If someone was coming, I didn't want them to know I was waiting. The sunlight stretched slowly across the floor, marking time by the movement of shadows. I watched the clock on the wall. The minute hand moved at its usual pace. I counted the seconds in quiet silence. Nothing happened at 8:30. Nothing at 8:45. This was the kind of waiting that tests a person, not because it is difficult, but because it demands you stay still with your own thoughts. I listened to the apartment breathe, old pipes settling, the soft click of cooling metal, the faint buzz of the hallway light through the door. At 9:06, I heard footsteps, not hurried, not hesitant, measured, familiar ones. The hallway outside the apartment has a way of carrying sound. You can hear when someone stops outside a door. And he did stop, right outside mine. My heart didn't race, but it did become aware, as if it remembered something before my mind could place it. The doorknob didn't turn, no key, no forced entry, just silence on the other side. A pause, presence, like whoever was there was listening first, checking the air, sensing the room, waiting for a sign. I didn't move. I didn't breathe deeply. I simply existed in the moment. Then, the softest sound, barely audible, like fingertips resting against wood, not knocking, not pushing, just presence, recognition without intrusion. Then the footsteps continued down the hall, slow and steady. I remained seated, still. A moment later, the outside door to the building opened and closed. The sound carried up the staircase and dissolved. He had come and left without entering. This was not what I expected. I waited another hour before moving, long enough for the air to settle, long enough to be certain the moment was complete, long enough to let my thoughts untangle from anticipation. When I finally stood, I walked to the front door and opened it. The hallway was empty. The scent was there again, faint, familiar, warm. Not heavy perfume, not artificial, something closer to skin warmed by sunlight, something I remembered but couldn't place yet. I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the stairwell. There was nothing to see, but something to understand. He came to the door, but he did not enter. This meant something. It meant restraint. It meant waiting. It meant this was not about trespassing. It was about proximity, about being near something he felt he could not let go of. I closed the door and leaned against it gently, not from exhaustion, but from realization. This wasn't just grief. It was ritual. Later that afternoon, I walked to the small park, 2 blocks down, the one with the bench facing the duck pond. Graham and I used to sit there on evenings when the weather was mild and our conversations didn't need subjects. The sky was overcast, but not unfriendly, soft gray, diffused light, the kind of day where nothing is sharp or loud. I sat on the bench and folded my coat around me. And surprisingly, I didn't think about the intruder first. I thought about the Mondays. Monday was the day the hospice nurse had visited, the day I learned how to measure medication, the day I learned how to lift him without hurting him. Monday was the day the world had felt the heaviest. Monday was the day someone else had been there, someone who also held him when breathing was thin. Someone who shared the quiet weight of those hours. Someone who loved him too. The realization came softly, not as a shock, as something I had always known, somewhere deep, but had not named. I sat with it, and it didn't break me. It just settled. The stillness around me felt kind. That evening, when I returned home, I walked straight to the bedroom and opened the cupboard where I kept the letters. I didn't look for the missing one this time. I simply touched the box. The paper inside rustled softly. So many words I had not yet read. Words written by a man who knew his time was limited. words written to be found exactly when they were needed. I didn't open the box. There are moments where opening something too soon can collapse the meaning it is meant to hold. I closed the cupboard gently and breathed out. There would be another Monday, and I would be ready for it. Not with fear, not with confrontation, just presence. The same presence that had been coming to my door. By nightfall, the house felt different again. Not because something had changed, but because I had. Awareness has weight, but it is also clarity. And clarity is a kind of peace. I sat in the living room chair, the one that still held the shape of him, and rested my hands on the armrests. No tears came. Just a long, slow breath that felt like the first one I had taken in years. I whispered, not to be heard, but to acknowledge the truth now unfolding. I am ready to remember him fully. The room held the words gently. The silence did not feel empty. It felt shared. The second Monday came with rain. Not a storm, not a downpour, just a steady, quiet rain that softened the whole street and made the world feel closer. The kind of rain that doesn't ask to be noticed, but is impossible to ignore once you do. I woke before the sun, not with anxiety, but with awareness. The house felt still in a different way that morning, not empty, expectant. I moved through my routine slowly. I boiled water, steeped tea, and sat at the kitchen table just as I had the week before. The light was dim, softened by heavy clouds outside. The apartment seemed to hold the gray gently, as if letting the day take shape before deciding how to feel about it. I didn't watch the clock this time. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm now. Grief has a schedule when it stays long enough. At 9:03, I heard the steps again. Soft, measured, unhurried. The same as before. But this time, they didn't stop outside the door. They continued past it, then paused. I stood slowly, careful not to let the chair scrape against the floor. The air in the hallway felt thick, like holding my breath would disturb it. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the knob. I didn't turn it. I just stood there, listening. A quiet sound, cloth brushing against cloth. Someone was standing only inches away, on the other side of the door. This time, I opened it. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to stand in the doorway. He stood there. Jonas. Older now than the memory of him I had been holding. Lines deeper around the eyes, shoulders slightly sloped, hair silvered with time, but his presence was the same, soft-spoken, careful. A person who had always moved gently in spaces where people were hurting. He didn't look startled. He didn't look afraid. He looked like he had expected this moment, maybe even hoped for it. We didn't speak immediately. There are conversations that cannot begin with words, conversations that require silence to loosen what has been held too tightly. He looked at me first, not at the house behind me, not over my shoulder, just at me. I met his gaze, not questioning, just seeing. Finally, he exhaled. Not a sigh, something quieter. He said, "May I sit?" Not, "May I come in?" "May I sit?" Right there in the hallway. I nodded and stepped aside, leaning slightly against the doorframe as he lowered himself onto the floor. He sat cross-legged, hands folded lightly, posture humble, as though he didn't trust himself to move too much or too quickly. I sat inside, just beyond the doorway, mirroring him, the threshold between us like a thin line of shared knowing. The rain tapped softly on the building. Time moved quietly around us. He didn't begin with an apology. He didn't begin with an explanation. He began with memory. He used to hum when he was thinking. Not a tune, just a sound, soft under his breath. Most people didn't notice. I heard it the first day I met him. I breath caught, not sharply, but suddenly, as if something inside me recognized the sound before the words even finished forming. Yes, I said. He did. We sat with that. It was a small truth, but a real one. He called you his anchor, Jonas continued. Not to me, to the nurse. I overheard it. He said you were the reason he stayed soft. My throat tightened, not painfully, just with remembering. He said you were the reason he felt safe, Jonas added. The rain thickened against the windows then, as if it had been waiting for those words to land. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just felt something open inside me. We sat like that for a long time. Finally, I asked, very softly, why Mondays? The question did not demand. It simply sought. Jonas looked down at his hands before answering. That was the day I drove him home from the hospital for the last time, he said. The day he knew he wouldn't be going back. I nodded slowly. I remembered that day. The sunlight had been gentle, the ride quiet. His hand weak in mine, but warm. Jonas continued, voice barely above the rain. I didn't know how to let that day go, so I came back, just to remember the part of him that was still light. He didn't look at me when he said it. Grief makes people avoid eye contact at the exact moments they want to be seen. I asked one more question. Why didn't you knock? He finally lifted his gaze. Because it wasn't my place. I only wanted to feel where he had lived, not replace anything you held. Something inside me softened then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. I gestured gently toward the door. I said, "You may come in," not because I needed answers, but because silence shared is lighter than silence held alone. He entered quietly, removing his shoes without being asked. He moved through the home the way someone moves through a memory, not touching anything, only letting his presence acknowledge what mattered. He stopped in the living room, by the chair Graham had loved. Jonas didn't reach for it. He simply stood near it, eyes lowered, shoulders drawn with the kind of grief that doesn't collapse a person, but hollows a place inside them. After a long, still moment, he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. I remained standing behind him. Jonas continued, voice not shaking. It softened. I wasn't just his friend. He trusted me with something before he passed, something meant for you. He reached into his coat. A letter, folded carefully, kept safe, protected, not hidden. My breath went still, not from shock, but from recognition. The missing letter, the one I had felt the absence of before I knew what was gone. He didn't hand it to me yet. He held it gently, like something that could bruise. I didn't know how to give this to you. I thought if I stayed close enough, I would feel when the time was right. And now it was here. Not as confrontation, but as completion. I reached out and took the letter with both hands. Not rushed, not trembling, just ready. The room felt warm then, not because of memory, but because of truth. I held the letter in my hands for a moment before opening it. The paper had softened with time. the edges slightly bowed as though it had been held and handled many times before it reached me. There is a particular weight to something written by someone who knew their words would outlive them. It is not heavy, but it is deliberate. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down. Jonas remained in the living room, standing quietly near the chair. He did not watch me. He looked toward the window instead, giving me privacy without leaving. He understood that proximity can be support on its own. I opened the letter carefully. His handwriting was the same as always. Curved, steady, gentle. The kind of handwriting that comes from someone who has never rushed a sentence in his life. It began simply, Eleanor. The room seemed to still a little at the sight of my name. I need to tell you something that will not change the love I have for you, but may change the shape of how you remember me. My fingers rested lightly on the page. He had written this, knowing exactly how I read things, slowly, line by line, letting each thought settle before moving to the next.
You have always known that I have loved you. You have known it in the way I held your hand, the way I listened, the way I existed next to you. There is nothing hidden in that. You were my home. I breathed in slowly, not to steady myself, to allow myself to feel the fullness of it. But there are parts of us that we carry quietly, not because they are secrets, but because they are old wounds we have learned to hold gently. My eyes paused on that sentence for a long moment. He had always spoken softly, even in writing. Before you, I had a love that I could not keep, not because it was wrong and not because it was unreturned, but because the world we belonged to then was not kind to certain truths. I felt my chest tighten, not in jealousy, not in betrayal, but in recognition. This was not confession. This was history. His name was Jonas, and he was my friend, my companion, my mirror. We did not speak of it to others. We did not give it shape with words, but he held a part of my life that existed before you, a part that taught me how to love you the way I did. My breath left me slowly, not broken, steady, real. The room did not change. The memories did not change. Only the understanding of them did. When we grew older, life moved us into different paths. I loved you completely. That was never divided. But the truth of who I had been before you still lived somewhere. And Jonas understood that part of me because he had lived in it with me. I glanced toward the living room. Jonas had not moved. His shoulders were still. His head slightly bowed. He was not listening, but he was feeling. When I became ill, Jonas came back to me, not out of longing, but out of loyalty, out of memory, out of a promise we made when we were young, that if either of us reached the final chapter first, the other would stand beside him so he would not arrive there alone. The rain outside softened into a lighter rhythm, like the world understood the moment. He stayed because he remembered who I was before pain and time softened me, and he stayed because he respected who I became with you. I closed my eyes for a moment. This was not a triangle. This was a life lived in full, a life before me, a life with me, and a life witnessed by someone who cared enough to stay. I looked back down. I did not tell you because I didn't want our love to become something that needed to be compared to anything else. There was no comparison. You were the future I chose. You were the quiet I longed for. You were the peace I had prayed for long before I knew your name. Tears didn't fall, but warmth rose in my chest. Gentle, steady, undeniable. I am telling you now because I want you to understand the presence you may feel in the quiet after I am gone.
If you sense someone remembering me, know that he is not taking anything from you. He is only holding his part of the story, the part that existed before ours began. I read that line twice, then once more. You did not lose me to him. He did not lose me to you. We all held the same love in different seasons, and love does not disappear just because time changes its form. Outside, the rain stopped. The quiet returned, not the empty kind, the shared kind. If he comes to the house, it is because he is remembering. Let him remember. It is the last piece of me he still carries, and he carries it gently. I exhaled slowly. The letter closed simply. Thank you for being the place my soul rested. I love you. I did not fold the letter back immediately. I let it rest open on the table. For the first time in years, something inside me settled. Not grief, understanding. I looked toward Jonas. He had not moved. He was still facing the window, giving me space. I spoke softly. Come sit. He turned, and his eyes glimmered with the kind of sorrow that doesn't wound, it honors. He came to the table and sat across from me. We did not discuss the past. We did not analyze the letter. We simply sat together. The silence was not heavy. It was full. Two people who had loved the same man, in different seasons, in different ways, with the same sincerity. There was no jealousy, no competition, only memory. And memory, when shared gently, becomes something easier to hold.
The rain had stopped by the time we finished sitting with the letter. The apartment felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. Understanding has weight, but it is a weight a person can carry once it is named. Jonas and I did not speak for a long while. We didn't need to. The house itself seemed to be breathing again, as if something that had been locked inside it for years had finally found air. After some time, Jonas stood. I should go, he said softly. There was no urgency in his voice, no discomfort, just awareness that the moment had reached its natural ending. I walked him to the door. He paused before stepping out, his hand resting lightly on the frame, not gripping it, just acknowledging it. I didn't mean to unsettle your home or your peace. You didn't, I answered. You just filled in a corner of it I didn't know was missing. His shoulders relaxed, not entirely, but enough. He nodded once, then stepped into the hallway. Before he walked away, he turned back, something unresolved in his eyes. If you ever want company on Mondays, I can knock instead. The sentence was simple, but it carried a lifetime inside it. I'll think about it, I replied. Not yes, not no, just honesty. He seemed to understand exactly what that meant. He walked down the hallway, steps steady, not looking back. I watched until the staircase swallowed him from view. Then I closed the door, not to shut anything out, but to let the moment settle. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet. The silence now held two histories instead of one. I returned to the kitchen and sat back at the table. The letter still rested where I left it, open, its edges fluttering slightly in the faint breeze from the window. I traced my finger along his handwriting. The curves, the soft pressure, the familiar rhythm of someone who had always written the way he lived, with patience. I should have felt peace, and I did. But there was something else, too. Something shifting. Not a threat, not fear, just awareness. My eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. The air there felt different again, as if the room was no longer resting, as if memory had stirred something awake. I stood and walked slowly toward the bedroom.
The floorboards beneath my feet felt familiar, but my body moved differently, more alert, more open, more aware of the space around me. When I reached the doorway, I paused. The room was untouched. Nothing was moved. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was visibly changed. But the feeling was different, like someone had exhaled in the room not long ago. I stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed, the way I had before. The pillow still held the gentle dip of remembered sleep. The air held a warmth that didn't come from sunlight, and then I saw it. Something so small I almost missed it. A strand of hair on the pillow. Not mine, not Graham's. A single short silver hair. Jonas's. He had been here before today, not only at the door, not only in the kitchen, here, in this room, near this bed, standing where I was sitting now. The realization did not frighten me. It unsettled me, not because it implied intrusion, but because it implied longing. Deep, unspoken, unprocessed longing. Grief sometimes makes people want to return to the last place love felt alive, but longing can shift into something else when carried too long in silence. I sat there a while, the strand of hair resting against the linen like a whisper someone left behind. It was then, in the quiet, that I understood something. Jonas hadn't just come to remember. He had come to hold on. To something. To someone.
To a piece of a life he hadn't fully let go of when time moved forward without asking either of us permission. The room felt heavier now. I stood and opened the window. Cool air flowed in, washing the space gently, scattering the stillness. I didn't remove the hair. I didn't throw it away. I left it where it was, to acknowledge what had been shared here, and what still needed to be understood. The silence of the house was no longer simply grief. It was something else now, something turning, something beginning to shift shape. This was the moment where memory started to become consequence. Evening came slowly. The light dimmed in layers, moving across the apartment like a soft curtain being drawn. I made a simple dinner and ate in quiet reflection. My thoughts did not race, they settled. But the understanding was clear. Jonas's visits were not as harmless as I once believed. Gentle does not always mean harmless. Softness can hold depth, and depth can hold danger if left unspoken for too long. I knew one thing with certainty now. I would need to see him again, not to confront him, not to accuse, to understand what he was holding on to, and what he was not yet ready to let go of. Because love can be shared, but grief? Grief can claim ownership if left untended. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't restlessness. It was awareness, the kind that comes when something delicate is moving inside your life, and you know if you touch it too quickly, it will break into pieces too small to gather again. The letter remained on the kitchen table. I didn't put it away. That felt wrong. It needed to breathe. It needed to exist in the open for a while, as though keeping it visible would keep the memory inside it alive a little longer. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky was still a cool blue-gray, and the apartment was wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. I moved quietly, making coffee instead of tea this time. The scent drifted through the house, grounding and warm. I found myself standing in the doorway of the bedroom again. The strand of hair was still there on the pillow, just where I had left it. I sat at the edge of the bed and looked at it closely. Something in me had changed. I was no longer simply observing the house. I was observing my place in it. This was no longer just my grief. It was shared grief. And shared grief creates new gravity. I picked up the hair between my fingertips and placed it gently in a small porcelain dish on the bedside table. Not to remove it, to acknowledge it. There is a difference.
I opened the window once more, and the early morning air entered with the faint scent of rain that had dried overnight. It washed the room clean without taking anything from it. When I returned to the living room, I realized something subtle had changed there as well. The photograph on the shelf, the one of Graham laughing on the dock, was angled slightly differently again. Barely noticeable, but noticeable once you learn how to see. Someone had come back. Not when I was awake, not during daylight, but after. Not to intrude, to stay close. I stood there a moment, the photograph catching early morning light. This wasn't carelessness. It was reverence. But reverence without boundaries is a kind of grief that becomes possessive. And now I needed to understand which direction his grief was turning. I walked to the park again that afternoon. The air was warm and the pond rippled gently under a soft breeze. I sat on the same bench as before, not to wait for anyone, not to seek answers, just to think away from walls and rooms and memories that held echoes. I didn't expect anyone to join me, but Jonas did. He approached quietly, footsteps soft against the path, hands in his pockets. He didn't sit right away. He stood for a moment beside the bench, as if asking without speaking. "Yes," I said, "sit." He lowered himself beside me, leaving just enough space to show he understood boundaries and just enough closeness to show he honored memory. We didn't speak at first. Silence between people who know the same grief can feel like conversation. Finally, he said, "I didn't realize I wasn't hiding it." He didn't look ashamed. He looked tired. "I thought I was being careful." "You weren't careless, just present." His jaw tightened slightly, but not in anger, in emotion restrained. Being there felt like the only way to keep him real, but maybe I stayed in the memory too long. I turned my head toward him just enough to meet his eyes. "Grief isn't something we leave," I said quietly, "but we can't live inside it forever either." He exhaled, a slow breath, like something heavy was loosening. "I don't want to hold on to him in a way that hurts you," he said. "I didn't know how to let go without losing him entirely." "You don't have to let go," I replied. "You just have to make space around it." We sat with that. Then something shifted in Jonas's expression, just barely, but enough for me to feel it. He said, "There's something more, something I haven't told you." The silence around us stilled. He looked out toward the pond, voice low. "He didn't ask me to only give you one letter." His fingers tightened around each other slightly. "There are more." My breath caught, not in shock, but in recognition. I had always known. I had felt the absence in the box before I ever counted. "How many?" I asked. "4," he said. He wrote them at different times, different stages, each one meant to be read when you were ready. My hands rested in my lap, still. "And you've been waiting," I said. He nodded. "I didn't know when the right moment was," he admitted. "I kept thinking I would feel it, that something would tell me. But I think I was waiting for myself, not for you." There was no accusation in me, only understanding. "Where are they?" I asked. His voice softened. "At my place," he said, "in a wooden box he gave me years ago. I haven't opened it since he passed." So Jonas wasn't just holding on. He was unready to let love become memory. There is a difference. He looked down, shoulders slightly closing inward. "I didn't come into your home to take anything," he said. "I came to remember who we both were when he was still here." I placed my hand on the bench between us. No touch, just presence. We both lost the same person, but we lost different parts of him, and that means we heal differently. Jonas nodded, eyes glimmering. "I don't want to lose your trust," he said quietly. "You haven't," I answered. But now we move with intention, not habit. The breeze lifted lightly through the trees. A quiet agreement formed in the space between us. He stood after a few minutes. When you are ready for the next letter, tell me. He didn't ask when. He didn't push. He simply walked away. Slow. Measured. Gentle. But this time, I didn't watch him go. I looked ahead because life was beginning to move again. Not back. Forward. Slowly. Softly. But undeniably. The house always held memory, but now it felt like memory was holding the house. Days passed quietly after the conversation in the park. I did not rush to call Jonas. I did not ask for the next letters. I didn't avoid him either. I simply let life return to its slow rhythm. But the rhythm had changed. I began to notice subtleties I might have overlooked before. The way the air felt warmer in certain rooms. The way light fell across the carpet differently in the mornings. The way silence no longer felt like my silence alone. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and knew, without needing to look closely, that something had shifted. The photograph, the one of Graham laughing at the lake, it had been moved again. Not by much, just a fraction of an inch, but enough to suggest a hand had passed through the memory. This time, it wasn't only the photograph. The small seashell beside it, the one we had found together on the shoreline years ago, had been moved too. Not carelessly, gently. Placed at a slightly different angle, as though someone had picked it up and held it for a moment before putting it back down. There was no panic in me, just stillness. I sat down on the sofa and looked at the photograph for a long time. The sunlight caught the glass, creating a faint reflection. I could see myself in it, layered over his smiling face. 2 lives sharing one frame. Not then. Now. I didn't touch the photograph. I didn't fix it. I didn't return it to where it had been. I let it stay as it was, because someone else had remembered something here. The room held a quiet tension, not threatening, but undeniable, like the air just before someone speaks. The kettle clicked in the kitchen, ready to boil. I didn't get up. Some things are more important than tea. The next day, I decided to test something. Not to trap, not to confront, but to observe. I placed the photograph deliberately. Not centered, not aligned, just slightly off.
I left the house that afternoon, walking slowly through the neighborhood. The air was cool, but not cold. The trees lining the street had begun shedding leaves, scattering fragments of gold across the sidewalk. I walked to the market, bought nothing in particular. Bread, a small jar of honey, a bouquet of inexpensive carnations. I didn't need the flowers, but it felt right to bring something alive back into the house. When I returned, the apartment was just as I left it, at least on the surface. I placed the groceries on the counter and set the flowers and water. Then I walked into the living room. The photograph had changed again. It was not where I had placed it. It was where it had always belonged. Centered, aligned, balanced. The seashell was turned again, the opening facing forward this time. This was not random movement. This was memory correcting itself. Someone was preserving the memory exactly as they remembered it, not how I remembered it. I stood still a long while, not afraid, present. I ran my thumb along the edge of the photograph frame. The wood was warm, warmer than the rest of the room.
Someone had touched it recently. Someone who remembered the precise arrangement. Someone who believed there was a right way to hold this moment in time. And then I noticed something else, something subtle but unmistakable. The dust. A faint trail of disturbed dust on the shelf, where a hand had moved, where fingers had traced, not to disturb, to remember. I realized then that this was no longer about longing for the past. This was about keeping it alive. And something about that unsettled me in a way the earlier visits had not. Grief can be gentle. Memory can be warm. But refusing to let time move can become something else entirely. That evening, I sat with the letter again. I read it slowly, letting each line settle the way it had the first time. There was no bitterness in me, no betrayal, just a growing understanding of how love shapes itself when held too long in silence. I traced the final line with my fingertip. Let him remember. Yes, but remembering and remaining are not the same. I closed the letter and placed it gently back on the table, not in the cupboard, not stored away, still visible, still breathing. I wanted to see what the house would do with it, not Jonas, the house. Memory has gravity, and I needed to know how far it reached. The next morning, the letter had not been moved, but the chair had, just slightly, as if someone had sat in it. Not long, just long enough to feel him there, to remember the weight of him, to borrow the memory. I stood in the doorway of the living room and felt something shift inside me, not fear, not sadness, but clarity. This was no longer just his grieving. This was now ours. But if two people hold grief together without speaking, grief can begin to take the shape of possession. I turned toward the kitchen. I knew what I needed to do next. Not confrontation, not accusation, not fear. Conversation. Real conversation. Face to face. Before memory became something heavier than either one of us could carry. I didn't rush to speak to Jonas. Not that day, not the next. There is a kind of truth that becomes clearer when it is not chased. So I let the house breathe and I watched how memory moved inside it. I started paying attention to small sounds, not loud ones, the quiet ones. A soft tick in the hallway floorboards late at night, a gentle shift of air near the living room doorway, the faint sound of fabric brushing against the arm of a chair.
They weren't frightening. They were familiar. Not the presence of a stranger, the presence of someone who believed they were home. One evening, as the sun began to set, warm orange light settled through the living room windows. I sat on the sofa with the carnations beside me. They were still fresh, petals full, stems dark with life. Across the room, the photograph and the seashell caught the last of the daylight. The room felt still, but not empty. That kind of silence has a shape to it, like someone is waiting for you to speak first. I didn't. I picked up my coat, locked the door behind me, and walked down the hallway. Not because I was running from something, but because I finally understood something. If grief is left to arrange a house for too long, the house forgets that time has passed, and I needed to remind time that I was still alive. Jonas's apartment was in the next building, a short walk through the courtyard, past a small fountain that was always too loud in the mornings and too quiet at night. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the vines growing along the stone wall.
I climbed the steps slowly, not hesitant, just steady. His door was the same deep green it had always been. The paint was slightly chipped near the lower edge. Graham had once kicked it by accident while carrying boxes in. The memory landed gently, not sharply. I knocked. Soft. 2 taps. The kind of knock that says, I'm here, but I won't force myself in. I heard movement inside. A pause. Then the door opened. Jonas looked different this time, not emotionally, physically. There was exhaustion in his shoulders, like someone who had been holding something heavy for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "Eleanor," he said, not surprised, not relieved, just present. "May I come in?" I asked. He stepped aside, and I entered. His apartment wasn't messy, just lived in. Books stacked near a chair, a blanket draped over the couch, a mug on the counter, still half full. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Graham's cologne had always left the same quiet trace. I sat down. Jonas stayed standing for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak. Then he joined me. Neither of us rushed. There is a dignity in not filling silence just because it feels large. Finally, I spoke. "I need to understand something. Not to accuse you, not to stop you, just to know." Jonas nodded once, eyes steady. "Did you move the photograph?" He didn't answer right away. His hands rested loosely on his knees. There was no guilt in him, only the weight of memory. "Yes," he said. "I straightened it." There was no defensiveness, no justification. He said it the way someone confesses a memory, not a mistake. "Why?" I asked. His voice didn't waver. "Because that's where he always kept it." I felt my chest tighten, not in pain, but in understanding. And something far more important became clear. Jonas was not taking from me. He was restoring something to himself. But restoration without permission can become intrusion. "Jonas," I said softly, "you're not wrong to miss him. You're not wrong to hold him close. But when you straighten the photograph, you're putting the memory back where you need it, not where I do." He closed his eyes, only for a moment. When he opened them, there was a rawness there, but not instability. "I didn't realize I was doing that. I wasn't thinking about what it meant for you. I only remembered how it used to be." And remembering is not the same as returning. He nodded slowly. "I know." The room felt heavier now, but not dark. We sat in the quiet again, the soft, breathing kind of quiet that has something warm inside it. Then Jonas stood. He walked across the room to a wooden cabinet, not ornate, simple, worn at the edges. He unlocked it with a small brass key. Inside was a box. Dark walnut, smooth, no engraving. He carried it carefully, the way someone carries something alive. He set it gently on the coffee table between us. He didn't touch it again. He didn't open it. He didn't explain. He just let it be there. I haven't opened it since the week he passed. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. The box was small, but the weight in it was not. I didn't reach for it.
Not because I didn't want to, because I knew what was inside was not meant to be taken without grace. "Not yet," I said quietly. Jonas nodded. He didn't look disappointed. He looked relieved.
Because now we were both carrying the memory, not one of us alone. And the house behind me, the one waiting, with its quiet, rearranged objects and held breath, felt lighter now, even from here, because the memory was coming back into the open. Shared memory does not haunt. It learns to heal. We didn't touch the box that evening. It stayed on the coffee table between us like a small sleeping animal, present, warm, containing more history than either of us could feel prepared to open in a single moment. And that was all right. Not everything is meant to be faced the second we find it. We sat a while longer, no urgency, no pressure. The kind of silence that exists when two people understand the same loss differently, but honor it in the same room. Eventually, I stood. Jonas didn't rise to walk me to the door. He didn't need to. We were past those gestures now. I kicked up my coat slowly, slid one arm into the sleeve, then the other. Before I left, I looked at him. "Thank you," I said. Not for the box, not for the photograph, not even for the truth. For allowing grief to become something we could speak out loud instead of something that hid in the walls. He nodded, just once. I stepped into the hallway and the door closed softly behind me. The night air outside was cool. The courtyard fountain was still running, water rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I listened to it for a moment before beginning to walk back home. My footsteps echoed lightly against the pavement. Everything felt quiet, but not lonely. When I reached my apartment, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The living room greeted me with the familiar scent of carnations. The photograph and seashell sat exactly where they had been earlier. The chair was still slightly turned. Nothing had changed since I'd left, but I had. I closed the door gently and set my coat on the hook near the entryway. I walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, looking toward the photograph again. This time, I saw what I hadn't seen before. The photograph wasn't only straightened. The glass had been wiped clean. There was no smudge, no dust, no fingerprint at all. Someone had touched it with care, not to claim it, not to interfere, to honor it. The realization softened something in me. Not forgiveness, because there was nothing to forgive. Not acceptance, because I already had that. Recognition. His grief was not invading my home. It was trying to keep him alive. But now that memory was shared again, not held in secret. I could feel something inside the house shift. The air was lighter, the silence less heavy. The rooms felt less watched and more remembered. The house was waiting, but now it was waiting with me, not around me. I picked up the carnations and trimmed the stems just a little, refreshing them. Dropped them back into the vase, watched the water ripple. Grief is quiet like that. Sometimes it asks nothing more than to be acknowledged. I turned on the lamp near the reading chair, the one Graham always favored. The soft amber glow filled the room, catching the edges of the photograph frame. I didn't sit there, not yet. Instead, I stood near the window, looking out into the courtyard. The night sky was a deep navy blue, the moon faint and pale behind thin clouds. A few windows across from mine were lit, people living their lives, unaware of the small, quiet shifts happening in this apartment. There is a particular kind of strength that comes when you realize the story is still unfolding, not backward, not repeating, but moving forward slowly. I let that settle in me. And then I felt it. Not fear, not surprise, just presence. Behind me, in the room. Not a person, an awareness. The kind that comes when memory stops being something that pulls and starts being something that returns gently. I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The moment passed like a soft exhale. I closed the curtains and turned off the lamp. The house breathed with me. And when morning came, sunlight flowed into the apartment in long, warm ribbons. The rooms didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt like rooms again, not archives of memory. I walked into the living room and saw the photograph exactly as I had left it. No movement, no adjustment, no trace of new fingerprints. The chair was in its place. The letter was untouched. The house was still. The quiet had settled, not because grief had left, but because it had been seen. Later that afternoon, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table. The sunlight reached across the tablecloth, patterns shifting slowly as time moved. I rested my hands around the cup, warming my palms. And I knew that when I next knocked on Jonas's door, it wouldn't be to question or to search for answers or to hold on to grief. It would be to choose to open whatever was inside the wooden box. Not because I needed to, but because I was ready to. The difference matters. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It was remembering with me. Not for me, not in spite of me, with me. There is a kind of peace that arrives quietly, without announcement, the kind that sits in the room with you and asks for nothing. That was the peace that settled over the apartment now. And when the next Monday came, I would be ready. Not to confront, to understand. Because some truths don't break us, they return us to ourselves, slowly, softly, steadily. I waited 2 days before going back to Jonas's apartment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the stillness inside my home to settle first. Grief had changed shape. It no longer pressed against the walls. It rested there quietly, like sunlight that lingers after the afternoon has passed. On the morning I chose to go, the weather was soft and gray. Clouds hung low, not heavy, just present. The sort of sky that encourages reflection. I wrapped a shawl over my shoulders and stepped outside. The courtyard fountain was running again. It always ran, but today I noticed the rhythm. Steady, unbroken, like breathing. I walked the familiar path to the next building. My steps were not hurried. There was no urgency now, only intention. I reached Jonas's door and knocked once. He opened it almost immediately. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped aside and I entered. The wooden box was already on the coffee table, as if he had known the moment would come. Not today specifically, just eventually. I sat, he sat across from me. We didn't fill the moment with small words. I placed my hands gently on the lid of the box. It was smooth beneath my fingers, the wood worn by time and touch. I lifted it. Inside were 4 envelopes, all addressed in Graham's handwriting. Soft, familiar, steady. My breath moved slowly in my chest, not strained, not trembling, the kind of breath taken when you stand at the edge of memory and choose to step forward. I took the top envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, not from neglect, but from being held. I opened it carefully. The first line read, "If you are reading this, it means you have learned to sit with the quiet again." I paused, not because it hurt, but because it soothed. He wrote, "I didn't know how to prepare you for a world without me,
I still don't, but I know you. You don't break loudly. You break like waves, quietly, and then slowly you return. I felt my throat tighten, not with tears, but with recognition. He had always seen me clearly. The letter continued. There will be moments when our home feels too full of memory and moments when it feels too empty. Both are real. Both are temporary. Do not rush to fill either space. Let them teach you where love goes when it changes form. I lowered the letter slightly, letting my eyes rest on the grains of the wooden table. The words didn't ask me to remember him more. They asked me to remember myself. When I looked up, Jonas was watching me, not intrusively, not anxiously, just present. He wrote this one early, before he began treatments. I nodded. I returned my attention to the letter. And one more thing. There are people who loved me quietly, in ways that you may not have seen. Their grief will look different from yours. Make room for it if you can. You don't have to carry them. Just don't push them away. I exhaled slowly. He had known. Not about Jonas entering the house, but about grief needing more than one place to rest. The letter ended simply. You were the love of my life, but you are also my peace. Remember that when the house feels silent. The silence is not empty. It is your own. I folded the letter gently and placed it back on the table. Jonas didn't speak.
He didn't explain. He just sat with me in the quiet, exactly the way the letter encouraged us to. After a while, I asked, "How long have you been carrying these?" He leaned back slightly, hands loose. "Since he gave me the box," he said. "He asked me to wait until you were steady enough to want the words, not cling to them." I understood. Because today, I didn't cling. I held. There is a difference. I closed the box, but I didn't push it away. "I'm ready for the next one," I said softly, "but not today." Jonas nodded once. "No hurry," he said. We sat in the soft quiet of the room. The grief was not sharp now. It didn't ache. It simply rested between us, witnessed and shared. After a while I stood. Jonas rose as well. But before I left, I touched the top of the wooden box gently, an acknowledgement, not a possession. When I stepped outside, the sky was beginning to brighten. The clouds had thinned. Sunlight filtered through in soft ribbons, not strong, but warm enough. The walk back to my apartment felt different this time. The courtyard seemed less still. The fountain sounded lighter. The jasmine in the air smelled sweeter. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The house welcomed me, not with memory, with presence. I placed the carnations in the center of the dining table. The photograph remained aligned. The seashell faced forward. The chair sat quietly where it belonged. Nothing needed to move. Nothing needed to be corrected. The house and I were breathing together again. I sat near the window and watched the light shift across the room. Healing doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like this. Gentle, precise, steady. Like letters written long ago, waiting for the exact moment the heart is ready to read them. The days that followed felt lighter, but not in the way that suggests forgetting. More like a door had been opened in a room that had been closed for too long, and now the air could move again. I found myself tending to the house differently, not out of habit, out of presence. I polished the dining table with slow, deliberate strokes. I folded the blankets in the living room instead of simply draping them over the back of the sofa. I placed fresh fruit in a bowl near the window because the sunlight fell beautifully there. None of it was about tidiness. It was about being here, fully here. On the third morning, I awoke early. The house was quiet in the soft way that comes just before sunrise. I walked into the living room expecting the familiar stillness. But something was different. The small journal, my journal, the one I had started writing in after Graham passed, was not where I had left it. It had been on the side table beside the reading chair. Now it rested open on the coffee table, open to a middle page. My steps were slow as I approached. I didn't speak. I didn't touch it at first. I just looked. The journal had not been disturbed in a careless way. The spine wasn't strained. The pages weren't bent. It had been opened with care. To a page I did not remember writing. Not because I forgot, because the page was missing. There was a tear, clean, careful, straight, where a page had once been. Not ripped in anger, removed with quiet intention. I sat down slowly. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the sensation that something deeply private had been recognized, not violated, seen. The missing page had been one of the early entries. I knew that without needing to search. The paper around the tear had that softness that comes from being written on when grief is heavy and the hand pressing the pen is tired. I closed the journal gently and set it aside. There was only one person who would have opened it, not out of intrusion, but out of longing. Later that morning, I walked across the courtyard again. The fountain sparkled under the early daylight. The jasmine vines moved slightly in the breeze. The world looked the same, but I felt the shift inside it. Jonas opened the door before I knocked, not because he was waiting, but because he always sensed when I was near. He stepped aside and I walked in. The wooden box was still on the coffee table. He hadn't moved it. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't tried to force the next moment. I appreciated that. I sat on the sofa. He sat across from me. I didn't circle the subject. I didn't approach gently. Not because I was angry, because honesty is a kindness when grief is involved. "You opened my journal," I said. He didn't flinch. "Yes, I did," he said. His voice was steady. No apology hidden inside it, no defensiveness either.
Why? I asked. He folded his hands loosely, resting them on his knees. I wanted to understand how you lost him, he said. Not in the way I did, in the way you did. I thought, if I understood your grief, I could understand mine better. The truth sat between us. Not harmful, just raw. I nodded slowly. And the page? I asked. He looked down, just for a moment.
That page was about the day I left, he said quietly. The day I stopped visiting. I thought if I removed it, maybe you wouldn't remember it as abandonment. My breath steadied itself. Jonas, I said, I never forgot. He closed his eyes, not from shame, but from realization. I know, he said. I just couldn't bear seeing your hurt written down. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was full of something heavier, deeper, older. Shared loss is a bridge, but bridges can only hold so much weight. I placed my hands on the couch cushion beside me, not reaching for him, just grounding the moment. You loved him, and loving someone sometimes means running when the pain becomes too large to hold. I didn't resent you for leaving. I only missed you. His eyes lifted to mine. There it was, the truth we had both been circling. We didn't grieve him separately. We grieved without each other. That was the difference. And now we were grieving with each other. The missing page was not a theft. It was a wound, one we could now name. I leaned back in the sofa, exhaling softly. Don't remove any more pieces of the past, I said. Not stern, not commanding, just clear. He nodded once. I won't, he said. We let silence settle again. Not heavy, not sharp, just quiet. Then I rested my hand on the wooden box. I'm ready for the next letter, I said. His shoulders lowered, not from relief, but from acceptance. He passed the box to me slowly, with both hands, the way someone passes a memory they cannot hold alone anymore. I opened it. Inside, beneath the remaining envelopes, something else lay hidden. A folded piece of sheet music. Handwritten. His handwriting. It was the song he used to play on the old piano in the living room, the one I donated after he passed, because I couldn't bear to hear the house echo without him. I hadn't known he wrote it. I thought he had been improvising. I thought the music had come from the room itself. I held the sheet music carefully, the paper soft from being handled many times before. Jonas looked down, voice quiet. He wrote it for you. The house inside my heart shifted. Not breaking, expanding. There are some things we are not meant to heal from. We are meant to carry them. Gently, deliberately. Like this. The fourth Monday arrived without announcement. I didn't circle the date on a calendar or wait for it like a signal. But when the morning light came through the blinds just a little differently, I knew. Some changes don't require clocks. They're felt. I moved through the morning slowly, making tea in the same white porcelain cup I always used. The house was still, calm. No sense of movement in the hall, no shifted air, no subtle sound. But the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt poised. I sat at the dining table and let the steam rise from the cup. When I looked toward the living room, the photograph remained where it had been placed last, the seashell angled the same, the chair untouched. Nothing had shifted, which meant something had. Silence is loud when it waits. Around 10 o'clock, I opened the curtains. The courtyard below was washed in early sunlight. A neighbor walked her dog. A couple crossed the path, hands lightly touching. Ordinary life moved around me. But the house felt aware. Not anxious,
just aware. I left the apartment and walked out to the hallway. The air smelled faintly of the jasmine that drifted from the courtyard. When I reached the elevator, I saw her, Celeste. She had never been loud, but today her presence seemed heavier, as though she had been holding her breath for weeks and was finally exhaling. She looked at me with that same steady expression I'd seen the day she stopped me by the gate, the expression of someone who has watched more than she has spoken. She didn't say hello.
Not urgent, not dramatic, just factual. I nodded slowly. I know. She stepped aside as I walked past her. No judgment, no warning, just the quiet solidarity of someone who sees more than others think she does. When I reached my door, I didn't pause to listen. I didn't wait to gather myself. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt occupied. Not invaded, occupied. Jonas stood by the bookshelf, his hand resting near the photograph, not touching it, just near it. His shoulders were tense, the kind of tension that comes from holding back emotion rather than expressing it. He didn't turn when I entered. He spoke to the room instead of me. "I need you to tell me if I still belong in this part of his life," he said. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was effort. I didn't move closer. I stood where I was. "You do, but not like this, not quietly in the walls." He turned then. His eyes were not angry. They were tired, deep tired, the kind of tired that grief carves in a person. "I thought I could remember him without asking anything of you," he said. "But I was wrong. I've been living in the space between holding on and letting go, and I pulled you into that space with me." There was no accusation in his tone, only recognition. I stepped forward, one slow step. "You didn't pull me. I walked there too. We both did. Because we both loved him." His breath broke slightly, but he didn't fall apart. "But we can't live there," I continued. "Not anymore. The memory is still ours, but the house is alive again, and we have to live in it, not haunt it." He nodded once, and the nod held weight. Then he reached into his pocket and removed a folded paper. The missing page. The one from my journal. He placed it on the table, not offering it, not returning it, simply letting it exist again. I shouldn't have taken it, not because of the page itself, but because I tried to rewrite something that belonged to both of us. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. Some things need to rest before they are touched again. I looked at him carefully. "You didn't come here to stay," I said softly. "No, I came to stop leaving in the wrong way." We stood in the quiet for a long moment, not heavy, not tense, just honest. Then I spoke what needed to be spoken. "When we open the next letter, we open it together. Not here, not in grief, at the lake." His eyes listed. Something eased in them. The lake had always been where we were all our truest selves, where laughter had come easily, where silence had been natural, not loaded. He nodded slowly. "Yes, at the lake." The room exhaled then. Not us, the room.
Its stillness softened, its tension dissolved. The walls no longer held memory too tightly. The house felt like mine again, not because I claimed it, but because it no longer had to carry what I refused to face. Jonas took a step back from the bookshelf, hands at his sides. He didn't look unsure now. He looked steadier than he had in months, maybe years. He left without ceremony. No embrace, no dramatic goodbye, just the soft sound of the door closing behind him, the kind of departure that carries respect. I stood in the center of the living room and let the quiet settle around me. The photograph didn't move. The chair remained still. The house was not watching anymore. It was resting. Grief had changed shape again, and this time it had made room for breathing. The plan to go to the lake came together quietly, not scheduled, not discussed in long conversation. It happened the way grief finally moves, when it is ready. A week passed before Jonas called. His voice was calm when he spoke, like he had taken time to place every word carefully where it belonged. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Sunrise." I didn't ask what time. Sunrise is not a number. It is a presence. I prepared that evening without ceremony. I placed the first letter, the one already read, back in the wooden box, along with the others. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and rested. I didn't think about the lake. I remembered it. The difference matters. Graham and I had gone there in every season. When the water shimmered warm in summer, when the trees glowed in autumn, when the shoreline frosted in winter, when everything smelled of rain in spring. The lake had seen our laughter, our arguments, our reconciliations, our quietest hours. It would see this, too. The next morning, I stepped outside before the sky had turned fully blue. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine. Jonas stood by his car in the courtyard, hands in his pockets. He didn't wave. He only nodded when I approached. That was enough. The drive was silent, not strained, shared. The kind of silence that says, we are doing this together even if we do not speak. The road wound through clusters of trees, branches arching overhead like quiet guardians. When the lake finally came into view, the water was still. Morning fog hovered above it like breath. We walked down to the dock. The boards creaked under our steps. A sound I'd heard hundreds of times before. The familiarity settled into my bones like warmth. We sat side by side. I placed the wooden box between us and opened it. The remaining letters rested inside, edges soft with time. I took the next envelope. Jonas didn't look at me or at the letter. He looked at the horizon, where the sky lightened slowly, patiently. I opened it. The handwriting was slower here, more deliberate, like he had written through fatigue. If you are at the lake, it means you are remembering without drowning. I felt my breath steady. I loved you here, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of love that sits in the chest and stays. My fingertips brushed the paper. I need you to know that the last years were not suffering. They were full. Full because you were there, even in silence. My eyes remained dry. Grief had changed shape. It no longer flooded. It flowed. And if someone else sits beside you now, let them stay. They are not taking my place. They are honoring it. I looked at Jonas then. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The letter continued. We do not get to choose how long we are loved, only how deeply. Let yourself be loved in the ways that come next. The final line was simple. The world did not end when I left. It waited. It waits for you. I folded the letter gently and placed it in my lap. The lake was still, the air warm with dawn. Jonas exhaled softly, as though something inside him had loosened just enough to allow breath to move again. We remained there until the sun rose fully, the light spreading across the water in ripples. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to explain. The moment had done what words could not. When we finally stood to leave, I closed the box and held it close, not out of need, but out of gratitude. On the drive back, the silence between us was no longer heavy. It was simply quiet. And quiet can be full. The house welcomed me differently when I returned. The air felt lighter. The rooms no longer carried a hush waiting to be understood. Grief no longer sat in corners. It rested openly, part of the space, but not controlling it. I set the wooden box on the dining table and sat in the evening light. The carnations had begun to fade around the edges, petals curling inward. I didn't replace them. Fading is not failure. It is a form of remembering. Night came gradually, shadows slow and soft across the floor. I lit a small lamp near the reading chair and sat without opening a book. I simply watched the room settle. There is a moment in healing where the hurt stops being sharp and becomes something else. Not absence, integration. I felt that happening. The letter from the lake remained in the box, but its words stayed with me. The house did not feel haunted by him now. It felt shaped by him. And there is a difference between memory that binds and memory that holds. I made tea and sat near the window. The courtyard below was quiet. Only one light glowed across the way, Celeste's apartment. She always stayed up late, not out of loneliness, out of attention. She noticed the world. I thought of her stopping me at the gate that day. I understood now she had not been warning me of harm. She was preparing me for truth. Truth takes time to arrive, or rather, it takes time to recognize. I sat there until the tea cooled, its steam disappearing into the room. Then I whispered, I'm ready. Not to anyone in particular, just to myself. Because the next letter would not be about grief. It would be about transformation. And transformation asks for stillness first. I left the lamp on when I went to bed, not because I feared the dark, but because the light felt gentle. Sleep came easily. The night did not trouble itself with dreams. Morning came without hesitation. Light filled the apartment in a soft golden wash. I moved slowly, not out of reluctance, but out of respect. Some moments required deliberate pacing. I placed the wooden box on the dining table and opened it. The third letter rested inside. I removed it and smoothed the paper with my palm. Jonas was not here for this one. It wasn't a moment to share. It was a moment to receive. I opened the envelope. If you are reading this, then the quiet in the house is yours again. I am glad. The words settled warmly. There is something you must remember. Grief is not proof of love. Living is. I closed my eyes for a moment. Do not let memory become a room you lock yourself inside. The sunlight shifted across the table. You have always had a life beyond us. You paused it to care for me. I know that. I saw it. I held it. Now you must step back into the world without apology. I inhaled softly. Do not shrink your days out of respect for my absence. Expand them because I loved you. The letter ended with something simple, something grounded. You are still here, so live, and let the world recognize you. I folded the letter slowly. There were no tears, no breaking, only the quiet realization that love does not end. It carries forward. The apartment felt different now, not because anything had changed inside it, but because something had changed inside me. The photograph was no longer a point of ache. It was a point of presence. I placed the letter back in the box. Then I opened the windows. Fresh air filled the rooms.
Light moved across the walls, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt new. The hallway outside my apartment had always felt like a place of passing, not belonging. A space one walks through, not into. But today I noticed the scuffed paint near the baseboards, the loose screw in the handrail, the faint mark from where something once bumped the wall. It was a lived space. I went downstairs to the hardware store and bought a small can of paint, sandpaper, and a cloth. I returned slowly, carrying the items like someone returning home with intention. I knelt in the hallway and began to sand the scuffed paint. The motion was steady, gentle, the kind of work that doesn't demand thought, it allows thought. Celeste opened her door at one point, holding a watering can. She looked at me, not questioning, not intruding. "Things stay longer when we care for them," she said. I smiled. "Yes, they do." She watered her plants and went back inside. No conversation needed. I repainted the wall in slow, smooth strokes. The hallway felt warmer when I finished. Welcoming. Not just a place between rooms, a part of home. When I stepped back inside my apartment, I saw the house differently again. Not as something to protect memory in, but as something to live in. I made lunch, I read, I rested. Not to avoid anything, simply because the day was allowed to be ordinary. Ordinary had become beautiful. The fourth and final letter remained in the box for another week, not because I feared it, because I respected it. Endings should not be rushed. When I finally opened it, the air in the room felt still, as though waiting to receive the words to. This is the last one. My breath softened. Not because love ends, but because words have done what they needed to do. The sunlight rested gently across the tablecloth. If you are reading this, it means you have built a life around a space where I once stood. That is not loss. That is love finding new form. My chest felt warm. Keep the house open. Let laughter in. Let conversation in. Let quiet evenings in. Let mornings with sunlight in. I close my eyes. Remember me with ease, not effort. The final line was not dramatic, not grand. It was soft. It was true. I loved you gently. Continue gently. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. The room exhaled with me. I walked to the mirror near the hallway, not to check myself, to see myself. My reflection stood calm, present, rooted. I touched the frame lightly and whispered,
Sometimes silence travels faster than words. The words did not echo. They settled. And the house, for the first time in a long time, felt whole. Not because grief had left, but because it had found its place, its shape, its home. I had